Ladies and gents, welcome to Jurex, and this is History of England, Fire and Swords, Extra Part 2 by the channel Extra Credits. Already the first part, million years ago or something. Search it, I guess you'll find it. So yeah, let's resume this. Apparently I missed, not just this, I think I missed the Punic Wars. I think that's unfinished 2 and 1 or 2 series. I don't know. I just forgot about it somehow. But yeah, I'll finish them and let's watch this one.
Welcome back to the Extra History of England. Once again, this spectacular tale will be told by David Crowther from the History of England podcast. And after last week's episode, Zoe and I have been debating all week on who's going to win this epic showdown between Edward and Philip.
I'm glad it's piqued your interest. But why didn't you just research the answer yourselves?
Well, Zoe not having opposable thumbs is a bit of a page-turning hindrance for one thing. But more importantly, we'd rather hear you tell us what happens next.
Well, in that case, you two, allow me to fill you in. In 1337, Edward led a country of maybe 4 million people against the most powerful country in Christendom, a country 5 times its size. Edward was never to gain a reputation as a stay-at-home kind of lad. He was confident, bullish, aggressive, a warrior. He would bend the world to his will. Edward had a plan. In a letter to the Pope, he wrote, "The best way to avoid the inconveniences of war is to pursue it away from one's own country. It is more sensible for us to fight our notorious enemy in his own realm." Edward would attack. He would follow the strategy of the chevauchée, a French word for raid on horseback. He would impose what he called fire and sword on the French countryside, marching on a wide 20-mile front, a hideous wave of destruction and death, burning and killing everything in their way. His chevauchée would cause enormous economic damage. It would humiliate the opposing Valois king.
I guess he chose the strategy for a psychological effect as well, right? Like if he just use a fire and sword strategy, burn down everything, kill everybody, basically, that would create this kind of a mentality like, holy shit, this guy is like a madman type of thing. People fear him more and more. Psychological warfare is pretty important, especially if you're fighting against somebody who has much higher odds than you, much bigger than you.
King Philip, and show Philip's subjects he could not protect them and that they should instead choose Edward as their king. Philip would be forced to come and fight a set battle where Edward was sure he could win, or at least that was the plan. England was small and insignificant, so Edward started by getting himself some big friends, including the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Holy Roman Emperor did not come cheap. But in 1339, Edward could march with his army into France, head held high, banners flying towards glory. In fact, his banners were flying towards humiliation and failure. The Holy Roman Emperor liked his gold very much. He was less enthusiastic about doing anything for it, such as supporting a balmy English loser. So he chilled out at home, spent a quiet night in with his gold instead. Edward's campaign of 1339 went nowhere. His useless allies had cost a fortune, and by 1340 Edward had a pile of debt so high he could hang glide off it. And he was forced to borrow more and more from Italian banking.
Yeah, that's basically shows you the world politics, like money isn't shit, right? If you think, oh, I'll just give you money, you're going to come for my aid. Yeah, that's not how it works. You need more leverage than that.
Houses. In Gascony, the war was going badly. Worse, the French took control of the English Channel with a large, well-equipped fleet against which the English could throw up only merchant ships. Edward's councillors, his naval captains and his nobles told him he could not break the French blockade. But Edward was angry and would not listen. He snarled at his council, "I will cross, and you who are frightened where there is no fear, you may stay at home." And so in 1340, the King of England, Edward III, against the advice of all his experts, attacked a navy almost twice his size head-on near the town of Sluys off the coast of Flanders. To the amazement of France and all Christendom, Edward won. 18,000 French sailors lost their lives. But while Sluys was a great victory which gave England back control of the English Channel, success on land still seemed a long way away. The only way Edward could get the money he needed to carry on was by Parliament voting him a special tax. So Edward went to Parliament to ask for the money, but Parliament was tired of the expense of Edward's war and refused. But Edward would not give up. In 2 small battles in Brittany, the English achieved stunning victories against absurd odds. Edward had 2 advantages. The first was aggression and superior leadership. Edward was lucky to gather around him captains of extraordinary ability. Walter Manny, a wildly enthusiastic, aggressive and talented tactical commander who would charge into every battle with incredible courage and the battle cry, "Manny!" on his lips. Henry of Lancaster, a cultured man who would write a book called The Book of Holy Medicines, lamenting his misspent youth of wine, women and song and advocating the religious life, who was also a visionary military strategist and winner of another absurdly unlikely victory in the south of France. the Captal de Butte.
Well, that's a combination of determination, isn't it? Somebody who basically, oh, I don't give a shit about lasers and things like that. I'm not gonna, go into parties and shit. I'm just gonna devote myself, just learning shit, this and that. Yeah, that's just the recipe of somebody who's just determined all around. This is ridiculous. I like how basically, Edward is out of odds lots of time, but obviously he has better. I mean, in Napoleon time, we saw that, how Napoleon had his marshals, and that kind of gave him massive edge. So if you have good generals under you, right, even with bad odds, you can win.
A Gascon was the leading cavalry commander of his age. Together, these men around Edward would make history. The second was that the English had taken the rulebook of medieval military tactics, torn it into tiny, tiny little pieces, rewritten the rules, stamped on the tiny pieces of the old rules, ground them into the mud, and danced on them. Every medieval army knew that battles were won by heavily armoured, chivalric aristocratic knights who sat on horseback and who by the sheer weight of their charge irresistibly smashed through any opposition. But Edward made English knights fight on foot. They did not charge, they waited for their enemy to attack them. Archers were set on the flanks and between the units of knights. All other European armies used the crossbow because it needed little skill, so anybody could be trained to use it. English and Welsh archers were armed with the deadly longbow. The longbow was a 6-foot bow of yew, massively difficult to draw and requiring a life of training from boyhood to use effectively. Handily, that's exactly what they had, since in all the villages and towns, fathers and sons practiced every week. The longbow.
Yeah, have you seen those videos where somebody plays Skyrim and basically draws the bow and just aim at the sky, and after sometimes you realize, oh, look at that, he hit a target very far in the distance. That's what long bows, people used to do, like extreme training, gigantic bows, and has to just aim it right. It is ridiculous to think, like, holy shit, the level of training you would need to do that.
Had a longer range than the crossbow, hit like a truck and could penetrate all but the best plate armour. It had a much faster rate of fire than a crossbow. Each longbow could fire a deadly storm of 6 arrows a minute. Edward would teach the French that the most powerful weapon on the battlefield was a lightly armoured, low-born peasant. But Edward's cause looked lost. His debts were so massive that he defaulted, sending 2 Italian banking houses into bankruptcy. England had now been fighting for 8 years and had very little to show for it, and Edward could find no one to lend him money. Worse still, in 1346, King Philip of France gathered a massive army and prepared to drive the English out of France once and for all. So Edward did the only sane and rational thing when broke and massively outnumbered. He spent every last penny he had, raised an army, and invaded. He landed in Normandy with a small army and a plan. He would burn and destroy.
Well, let's be honest. What else he was gonna do? He's all in by now, right? If he backs up and starts to think rationally, he's gonna lose everything anyway, right? He has to do this shit.
Destroy French countryside as he marched north towards Flanders, pulling Philip behind him. And then he'd join up with the Flemish army and with the combined army turn, fight and destroy the French in battle. But as he marched north, he was in danger of being trapped by the rivers before he could meet the army of Flanders, and it was critical that Edward found a way over the River Somme. Desperately the English marched, the French snapping at their heels. Again and again the fords and bridges were held against them. And then one night, as the French were closing in, they found an Englishman living in France, and he told them of a secret ford, marked by a white stone. It was called Blanche Tac. In the dead of night, the English slipped over the ford and
What
were
is this,
away.
a fairy tale? When everything seemed lost, one friendly face told them this secret passage. Like, what the fuck?
But the next day, disaster. The army of Flanders were not coming. The only reasonable thing to do now was to run for the coast, England, and safety. But Edward didn't like to do the reasonable thing, and so at a place called Cressy, without the Flemish, he turned his army to face the French. It was time
That
to
is not a reasonable thing. If he does that, his own people will be pissed off at him. After all this, he came out empty-handed, right? I mean, that would be bad all around for him.
fight. To his son and heir, the 16-year-old Edward, known to history as the Black Prince, he gave command of the left wing. As Philip marched his army towards Cressy, the roads were lined with French shouting, "Kill! Kill!" On the 26th of August, 1346, Philip's army drew near the English force. The French were strung out for miles. Philip's best commanders advised caution: put on those comfy gym jams the Queen gave you last Christmas, don the royal slippers, get a good night's snooze and let everyone catch up, then drown the English in a river of their own blood after a light breakfast. But Philip looked at the puny English army, now less than 1/3 his size. He looked at the contemptible English peasants and their bows. He heard the cries of kill in his ears, and he ordered the attack. A wave of crossbowmen came forward to soften the English up with thousands of bolts. But before they could get in range, the English bent, drew, fired, and unleashed a storm. The crossbowmen ran or died. Furious.
Yeah, but this is obviously like, okay, this is the case of in World War II, right? Sermons versus tigers. I mean, you need to have a strategy. They are longbowmen. You're just gonna run in with crossbowmen like that. Of course, they're gonna shoot you before you can even come into range. It's ridiculous.
Philip ordered the cream of French chivalry to attack. As they thundered towards the English lines, they brutally cut down any of their own crossbowmen in the way, and the flower of French chivalry started to die. Even where the finest armour protected them, horses were vulnerable, and the chaos and screams of men and horses as the arrows struck home was terrible. Between waves of attacks, English and Welsh archers sprinted into the field, retrieved arrows, and thrust daggers into the exposed eyes or necks of the helpless fallen French knights. But the courage of the French was undeniable. The blind King John of Bohemia ordered 2 of his companions to tie their horses to his and lead him into the fray. All 3 were found at the end still linked together in death. And despite horrible losses, through sheer courage and weight of numbers...
Why? What? Why did he do that? Why did he actively engaged if he can't even see? Right? I mean, things has to be sensible. I mean, I guess lead from behind, basically give orders or something. What's the point of doing this? Like, tie up 2 people and I'm going to march myself? How is that going to help?
His companions to tie their horses to his and lead him into the fray. All 3 were found at the end still linked together in death. And despite horrible losses, through sheer courage and weight of numbers, many French knights did make it to the English lines. Finally, there they could crush their tormentors. But the tiny contingent of English knights would not break. At one point, the young Black Prince was so hard-pressed that one of his commanders begged Edward to send reinforcements. Edward turned to his good parenting guide, teaching self-reliance section. Tell my son this is his chance to win his spurs. The Black Prince was on his own, and the Black Prince did not break. Eventually, Edward knew it was time to finish this. As the massive French army milled in shock and chaos and pain and confusion, the English knights mounted their horses and levelled their lances, and the French fled. And Europe reeled with shock at the news that the flower of Christendom lay dead in a field of blood, slaughtered by English peasants.
And there's the ominous news for everybody in Europe. Like, okay, English are rising, which is gonna turn out to be English Empire by the end, I guess, after a few centuries. Yeah, I love this or history of England. Yeah, I mean, people who doesn't know any English history basically just assume that as soon as people of England, Anglo-Saxon and Normans, as soon as they become a thing, they were dominant. But that wasn't the case, right? Slowly they become dominant. Before that was French and I guess other countries of the Europe. Yeah. Right, people, if you like my reaction, don't forget to subscribe. Check out the Rick Sunday, the link in the description. Check out the classic of the cards, and yeah, I'll see you next time.